ahead and get started. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a few just introductions that I'm going to share, and then we're going to go ahead and shift to our panel. All right. So again, good morning, and thank you so much for being here today. This is the second in VentureWell's Community Conversations for Advancing Equity. And today we're going to be talking about creating inclusive spaces and building confidence. Oops. Please excuse my slow screen. All right, so actually, I'm just going to go ahead and give a little introduction. It looks like my slides are not working too well. So thanks again for being here. Wanted to share a little bit about VentureWell. So we are a nonprofit organization. We're based in the US, though we work globally. And our mission is really focused on supporting science and technology innovators to solve the world's greatest problems. We work, as I mentioned, across many parts of the US as well as in a number of different countries. And today, as I mentioned, we're here to share our community conversations for advancing equity. So VentureWell has been, thank you so much. Perfect. So, so this event is really focused within the context of some broader work that we're doing around equity and inclusion. And the themes that we'll be talking about today really came from a national study that we commissioned in 2019 that was conducted by a group called Quality Evaluation Designs. And it focused on practices as well as existing efforts, since we know there's tons of work already happening in terms of broadening participation and increasing access pathways for STEM innovation and entrepreneurship. And the study focuses within the context of higher ed, but also has some cross applicability in other sectors. And a little bit just on the context of the study. So there was an environmental scan conducted, a web review, and then lots of conversations, both with program leaders from nonprofit and higher education, as well as 65 students who identified as early stage innovators. And a lot of those voices really informed the report that we released in July that summarized some of the findings. All right, let's go to the next slide. So wanted to say as well, you'll see in the context of the report, which we'll link to in the chat, that in the collective, we talk about underrepresented groups. In general, we wanted to, the first bullet really sort of lays out sort of who we're talking about when we use that phrase in the collective. And really, in general, one of the major frames of the report was really acknowledging that in STEM innovation, as well as in lots of different systems and structures, there are certain groups of people whose voices continue to be amplified, as well as other groups of people who continue to be stereotyped, marginalized, or left out of the conversation. And so again, that's the sort of the lens through which the work was conducted, and the discussion will be presented today. And also just important to acknowledge that language certainly is adaptive and constantly changing. So these are the words and identifiers that we're using to kick off the conversation. And we also see that as you know, certainly an evolving part of the work. Wanted to quickly touch on, so in the context of the report, there were 6 major recommendations or sort of action areas that emerged. We don't have time to go into all 6 of them now, but as I said, we'll post the link to the report in the chat. And today we're going to be focusing our conversation on 2 of the 6, which is creating inclusive spaces and building confidence. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to have an opportunity to really dig deeper into those 2 areas. And here, very shortly, I'm going to be handing over things to Monica Dean, who's going to be our moderator for today. And we have 2 panelists as well who will be joining us, and they'll all have a chance to introduce themselves shortly. And last thing before we start, just wanted to direct you to the chat at the bottom of your screen if you want to share introductions, discussions, comments, as well as using the Q&A for asking any questions that come up, and we'll have a section for that. And then you'll see as well, a poll just popped up. Would love to give our presenters a quick snapshot of who's in the room. So if you can take a quick moment and select those answers, we'll close that shortly, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so let's go ahead and close the poll. All right, and so you should be able to see on your screen a quick snapshot of where folks are coming from. And thanks so much for everyone who shared. I know we have a few people who are still trickling in, but it's really helpful to get a sense of who's here today. And again, encourage you to use the chat for any comments that you have, and the Q&A along the bottom line to share your questions. And after we have a few moderated questions, we'll turn it over to questions from you. All right, so with that, I'll turn it over to Monica, who will be our moderator to get us started.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you to VentureWell for asking me to moderate today's conversation. So I am Monica Dean. I'm the director of the Jill Kerr Conway Innovation and Entrepreneurship Center at Smith College, a leading women's college located in rural Western Massachusetts. Conway launched in 2016 as an endowed center. Our mission is to create a pipeline of exceptionally innovative, entrepreneurial, and financially savvy women, and we offer co-curricular programming, academic courses, and engage in research at an institution where students, staff, and faculty are predominantly white. Conway values the diversity of all voices and perspectives, which are critical to the development of an innovative and entrepreneurial culture on our campus and beyond. Our aim is to attract students of all backgrounds, regardless of their race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, ability, and nationality. As well, we seek to engage those who are first-generation college students and students who are from low-income backgrounds. Our ability to attract Black students from the African diaspora has been easier than other centers on campus, given we are the only center not affinity related with the specific leadership demographic profile. I am a Black Latinx woman graduate of a historically Black university. And our director of special programs is an African-American woman and a Smith graduate. Both of us are first gen. We have become magnets for students of color, in particular Black students on campus, who seek us out as role models. However, their attraction to us is not necessarily because of their interest in entrepreneurship. So we still have to create strategies to engage students in our activities, many of which are outlined in the VentureWell report, including conducting authentic outreach, using more inclusive language and images to describe what we do, and engaging a diverse group of women in delivering our offerings and mentoring our students. So for today's discussion, I am pleased to have us joined by Jimmy Choi from Arizona State University and Jade Lockhart, who is from NextCubed. They will be contributing to VentureWell's continued conversation around fostering spaces that welcome a diversity of perspectives, backgrounds, and approaches, which are essential for excellence in innovation and entrepreneurship in science and technology. Specifically, they will discuss strategies and solutions for addressing barriers in two action areas: creating inclusive spaces and building confidence. Following Jimmy and Jade's discussion, we will then open up to the audience, who will be able to pose questions to our panelists. So first, I would like to introduce Jimmy to give her background, and then Jade. Jimmy.
Thanks so much, Monica. Hey, everybody. Thanks, VentureWell, for asking me to be part of this conversation. As Monica said, I'm Jimmy Choi. I'm from Arizona State University. I lead what is now the named and endowed J. Orrin Edson Entrepreneurship and Innovation Institute. Valuing entrepreneurship is one of the core 8 design aspirations of Arizona State University. And importantly, we're guided by our charter, which at the heart of it is about who we include and how they succeed. If I had to say in a nutshell, Arizona State University as the largest public research university in the country, with about $640 million in annual research expenditures and more than 120,000 full-time students, degree-seeking students. The idea of excellence with inclusion and impact at scale is exemplified by everything that we try to do. So the J. Orrin Edson Entrepreneurship and Innovation Institute is a pan-university entrepreneur support mechanism to work with ASU students, faculty, staff, alumni, and the greater community. And we leverage a number of things like our venture development program, student outreach and engagement, youth entrepreneurship, community entrepreneurship, working with Main Street entrepreneurs, and then a number of things that we have benefiting us, like a few endowed funds, a seed funding mechanism to be able to support students and faculty. We're one of the NSFI core sites. So quite broad and quite comprehensive, given the size, scale, scope, and scale of what we're trying to do. But importantly, staying connected to national networks and national trends. And so briefly, I'll mention that I was really pleased to be able to serve as a project advisor for the study that Shaheen mentioned in the beginning, and did have a hand in the design and overall design of the study. So really glad to be able to talk about it. Thank you.
Great. And next, I'd like to introduce Jade Lockhart.
Hi, everyone. It's such an honor to be here today. I am Jade Lockhart, and I am the program manager at NextCubed for our HBCU Founders Program, which is an inaugural program this year. Through the program, we are currently serving over 300 HBCU students from about over 50 HBCUs, so it's a very diverse group. And this summer, we are actually having the first ever accelerator for HBCU students and recent alum. There are so many great entrepreneurship centers at universities across the nation, but unfortunately, most HBCUs lack the funding and resources to be able to have entrepreneurship centers on their own campuses. And so through the HBCU program at NextCubed, we have been able to launch a program that is very inclusive for students across HBCUs that have business ideas but need mentorship, resources, and of course funding. And so I'll dive deep into what the program really entails a little bit later in some of the questions, but I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. And I'm also an HBCU alum. I went to Spelman College.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we're going to start with Jimmy. Can you please share some strategies for broadening participation in I&E through the creation of inclusive spaces that you have tested or implemented at ASU? What has worked well, and where have you encountered challenges?
So I think the idea of inclusive spaces is really on a number of dimensions, right? There's the idea of kind of physical space. What kind of spaces on campus or off campus are we inviting people into, whether it's to co-work or whether it's to do things like use makerspace, fabrication labs, 3D printers, that type of thing? Or where are people congregating? Or how do people come together? And when someone walks into the room, do they feel like out of place, or they feel immediately comfortable? And it's everything from overall physical environment to who else is in the room. So one aspect that I'll talk a little bit about is physical space. And then the other, I think too, which is equally important, is about emotional and psychological space, right? And that emotional and psychological space is connected to the idea of physical space. So as one example, we're quite fortunate. We have a number of what we call place-based innovation spaces. And those spaces look a lot like what you might expect to see in some larger cities, like a co-working space called like WeWork or Spaces or things like that. You know, they're designed to bring people together. They're designed to support things like, you know, serendipitous collision, right? I'm hanging out at the coffee machine and I'm getting some coffee, or I'm refilling my water bottle, and I have a chance to ask somebody else who, you know, maybe I haven't met before, hey, are you a student? Are you a founder? What are you working on? And that idea of like really enhancing collision. But when you have spaces like that, which are designed to kind of keep people in and signal who's in the know and who's not in the know, then I think that that's where we break down the idea of physical spaces supporting connectivity, supporting innovation, supporting entrepreneurship. I'll give you one key example, which is one of the things I talk about all the time with, you know, the people who are designing or creating these types of spaces. That one thing I might say is, how do people get access? Do you need a card? Do you need permission? Do you need like to be part of the university community and campus? Do you need access like certain hours? Do you need a certain type of, way to get into a space like that? That's one. Two, what does the space look like in terms of, is it inviting for you? When you walk in, do you feel like you're walking into a museum that you really shouldn't touch the furniture because everything is sparkling white? And then everybody's got these fancy whiteboards and everybody has these fancy, high-tech things all around, but it's not really clear how you're supposed to use them. And three, a third example, when you walk in, do you feel like that chair probably costs more than my entire startup? And so, right. And so we went into a lot of these co-working spaces with these high design ideals in mind without really thinking about how people use them. And we want to be able to get in there, move things around, regroup things, say, hey, why don't you join us over here? You want to be able to do things like bring in other people to work with you. So I think when you're looking at space, we really want to be quite cognizant of designing for the actual users. And when you design for the users, are you designing for, again, just people in your university community? Do you need a student ID or an access card to get in? Do you need a PhD in like coffee and mechanics to understand how to use that coffee machine? Because like, I don't know about you, but I've never seen a coffee machine like that with 600 handles and 3 different widgets and 10 different grinds. Like, is that a way that you design keep people out and you signify things like class and you signify things like background? Or do you make it super easy for people to come in and get really comfortable and redesign and reconfigure the way that they want to? So that's just one aspect of physical space, but I'll pause there because I'd love to hear what Jade has to say about this too. And then maybe we'll continue on about emotional and psychological space as well.
Absolutely. I would love to chime in. So as far as inclusive spaces and what we're doing with the Next Cubed program, we've had to be intentional because the space is virtual, right? So having students from different schools coming together in a virtual space could be daunting for some students, especially in a vulnerable space where you're sharing about your business ideas. And so what we've done is we've taken that large group and that large daunting size and broken it up to be a little bit smaller and more tangible and make an inclusive space for students to really feel comfortable. And so we've implemented office hours every week. And so we bring in experts and mentors from the Next Cube team, but also from externally as well, that are able to, one, come in and set the space by sharing their own founders' journeys. And through doing that, that really, allows the students to see themselves where those mentors and experts started. But then the size of office hours is usually relatively small. It's been so far under 25 students. And so having that space, even within the students, are able to relate to one another and they're really able to, see themselves within each other. Some of the students that come are early stage and are just getting started with their business ideas. And then some of the students and even recent alumni that come are very well on their way as far as having their ventures funded and having full-fledged startups. And so creating a space where everyone is really able to learn from each other and those questions are really encouraged and nurtured has been a really great way to make sure that everyone feels included. And then we also like to work with the students one-on-one as well. And so we have a Slack channel, right, still using a virtual setting, but through Slack, the students are able to ask each other questions individually, connect with each other one-on-one, as well as us, the mentors and experts as well. So if they have a question that they don't feel comfortable asking or something comes up at a different time of the day that we're not hosting the office hours, they're still able to come and ask those questions. So even in a virtual setting, those are ways that we've really been able to make sure that everyone feels included, no matter where they come from, what their business background is, and what their business idea may be.
Great.
Jade, if I may, I think that's one of the things that's so important about, right? So the idea is that you're in the virtual space or even in a physical space, you're starting with the idea of inclusion.
Right.
And I think that's one of the key things when we look at broadening participation is that if we start with the idea of inclusion and inclusive principles and equitable practices, that's what leads to diversity, right? I think where we sometimes make a mistake and other people, good intentions too, make mistakes is that they want to start with the diversity, right? Let's just have cosmetic diversity. Let's just like make it appear to be diverse as opposed to really be welcoming and inclusive. And I think that's one of the key things about inclusive spaces is that emotional and psychological dimension, which is this question of how do I feel when I enter a virtual space? How do I feel when I interact with other people? Does it resonate with me? Do I see myself, whether it's in mentors or whether it's faculty advisors, or do I feel very much like, this is really not for me? And not from a perspective of deficiency, but from a perspective of identification, right? When you look at social identity constructs, I think that supporting of the multiplicity of social identity is so critical. And exactly as you said, we could do it in virtual spaces by the way you host things, by the way you understand power dynamics, by the way you understand kind of who's always kind of speaking and dominating versus who's allowing space for other voices to come in. So I think the idea of creating inclusive spaces really needs to be multidimensional and frankly needs to also be in alignment with a number of other principles, right? You can't have inclusive spaces and then not be conducting authentic outreach. So it's just kind of the looking for consonance on like overall agreement and a holistic approach.
And you brought up so many great points there, Jimmy. I think starting with inclusion is always really your best bet. And also remembering too that diverse spaces, even when working with minority students, for example, those spaces are still going to be diverse within themselves. There is no monolith as far as minorities and diverse students. And so like something that we've really been able to learn and explore is that we're working with a wide set of students that are very diverse, coming from different regions and different HBCUs. And so all of the different schools are individually have different entrepreneurship resources. Some of them have classes, some of them have programs, some of them have centers, some of them don't, right? And so as a result, we're dealing with a very diverse group of students. And so making sure that we set into place different inclusion practices, it made sure that all students really feel welcome. And that type of setting is really just necessary in order for innovation to happen.
Yeah.
You really have to be comfortable to think outside of the box and ask those big questions.
Thank you. So Jade, I just want to build upon this current discussion. So you're a recent graduate of Spelman College, and can you speak to your experience when you were at Spelman in assessing whether an INE program was of interest to you, and what cues did you look towards in determining whether you would feel comfortable or welcome in an in-person, or you can talk about virtual program or event?
Absolutely. So my experiences at Spelman really have helped me to be able to formulate the program at Next Cubed. I've been able to draw on my past experiences and know what went well and things that I wish I could have seen differently. And I've been able to implement those. So it's been really such a pleasure and joy. So for myself at Spelman, I came in as an education major and I chose to study education studies, which was a non-teaching certification track because I had a love for technology and wanted to do more within education technology. And I knew that I didn't really want to see myself like working in a classroom. And so at Spelman, I really began this journey of trying to explore where my passions lied. And there was actually a program, an entrepreneurship program called the Spellpreneur program. And so we would have weekly sessions where we would get to interact with entrepreneurs. And so I actually sought out that space as a safe space and as a place where I could learn because there weren't any attachments as far as majors that you had to have. It was just students gathering that were interested in entrepreneurship, right? So that broadened requirements really allowed me to come in and just feel included and feel safe and welcome. And so through that program, there was actually a 10-day hackathon. And so I had came to the program a lot and really enjoyed learning from the different speakers, but I still wasn't sure if I had a business idea of my own. And so by having a hackathon where we were taught all of the steps to actually go from a business idea to launching an MVP. Again, that was another space, comfortable space for students with business ideas and students that didn't have them to really come together. And so through that process, I ended up becoming a startup founder. And that was such an amazing experience that was birthed out of having an inclusive space and having a space where I was really able to come in and ask my questions and just build. And so I think those experiences were really pivotal to me, having a space that, you know, wasn't attached to a major and just really was open to all students. I think Spelman being a liberal arts college, we did have a lot of those types of spaces that we were really able to come in and learn and really just be able to think. And so that was something that was really an amazing experience. And those things, those strategies that were implemented really made me feel comfortable.
Great, thank you. So this question is for you, Jimmy. Can you please share some strategies for broadening participation in INE through building confidence among students from underrepresented groups at ASU? Again, what worked well and what challenges have you encountered?
So I think, Jade, you said a few important things really that just hits the nail on the head, right? The idea is at Spelman, you weren't screened out before you even had a chance to think about, is entrepreneurship for me? Can I be entrepreneurial in the way that I'm thinking about education and technology? And so I actually think it's less about building confidence and just creating the space to allow for the confidence to flourish, right? The self-agency, the empowerment to happen. Because I actually think it's not a question of lack of confidence, especially with underrepresented students. Sometimes it's a lack of familiarity, right? Sometimes it's a lack of, I'm not really interested in business, right? And so everybody talks about entrepreneurship when it comes to things like, oh, your business idea and your business pitch and pitching for money and getting capital. That's not what entrepreneurship is, right? Entrepreneurship can lead to many different outcomes. In your case, right, Jade, that's an amazing outcome that you find yourself as a startup founder. What you didn't do is you didn't go in saying, oh, this is for startup founders. That's how I identify. That's how I see myself. So I'm going to jump in there now, right? So I think a couple of things that are, I think, quite germane here. One, we really need to be thoughtful about language. And is language designed to screen people in or screen people out? We see a lot of times, whether it's through constructs like social identity, how you're dressed, how you look, do you look like you belong? Do you not look like you belong? A lot of things in our society is screened to like make people feel they don't belong, as opposed to making people feel like they do belong. So language, in terms of the way we've approached entrepreneurship at ASU, is exactly the way Spelman has. It's not dependent on the major. We don't speak just to the engineering students. We don't talk about it about, just about business. We talk about it actually more about being entrepreneurial rather than being an entrepreneur or being, right, pursuing entrepreneurship. Because if you're entrepreneurial, it's literally, it just means that you're an innovative, problem-solving, creative person that can approach a variety of things in a variety of different ways. And again, be unique and disruptive and creative about it overall. So we really try, the idea of building confidence is more just get out of the way. Don't kill something before it even has a chance to become something. Provide, support mechanisms, tools, resources that helps break open things that are traditional barriers, right? Traditionally, when people talk about entrepreneurship, they always talk about it as scalable technology ventures, right? It's always the next Facebook, the next Uber, the next Elon Musk. There's something, I don't know if you noticed, right? These are all Silicon Valley, white male-led technologists, as opposed to when you think about being an entrepreneur, I think about Oprah Winfrey. I think about creating this really mega entertainment empire. I think about Geoffrey Canada, right? Creating a way that people can pursue and think about education differently from birth all the way through college going. So for us, what's worked well is to be interdisciplinary, be inclusive, be collaborative, create a big tent for many majors, disciplines, industries, people to come into, and then provide resources and supports that help break frankly, the shibboleth, right? We help break the secret language of entrepreneurship, because breaking that jargon and giving people the ability to say, don't worry about it, I know how to speak your speak. Not only do I know how to speak your speak, but I'm going to speak your speak better than you, and I'm going to innovate on your speak, is so uplifting overall. So that's worked really well. Sometimes, what hasn't worked is how do you break through, especially with an institution as large as ours? So many things going on. What do I focus on? What do I choose? I'm trying to succeed in my academic classes. I might have a job. I might have family obligations. So every once in a while, you're like, I wish everybody knew about entrepreneurship and being entrepreneurial, because it could really help in so many different facets. So we're still experimenting with the idea of focusing on being entrepreneurial as opposed to having it be an outcome driven, I'm now an entrepreneur. Does that make sense? So it's kind of some things we're working on.
That's great. Thank you, Jimmy. And at Smith College, we have done the same as a liberal arts institution. This word entrepreneurship may be scary to some, or they're just not inclined to participate in our activities. So more often than not, we'll use these words to describe what we're doing. We help you identify problems and create solutions. Always problems and solutions. So thank you. So Jade, I have a question for you. So the HBCU initiative launched this fall. So I'm curious as to what has been your strategy around recruiting not only students, but alumni from these institutions, and how have your efforts fared thus far?
Absolutely. I want to make one quick comment about the last question as far as building confidence in students, especially from groups. So something that we have been able to do, and it was a strategy that I saw at Spelman and I loved it. And so I made sure that we implemented it at NextCubed as well. And it's important to make sure that, and as Jimmy mentioned, when you think of the Elon Musks and you think of the white male entrepreneurs, oftentimes underrepresented founders may not identify with them because their worlds are so distant and so far, and they may not know Elon Musk's in their inner circles and may not feel that it's possible for them. So by bringing in underrepresented founders that look like them, that have journeys that were similar to their journeys, it really helps the students feel comfortable and know that anything is possible for them as well. And so as far as recruitment, I mean, I think just having people that look like them and being able to tell the students, these are the types of founders that we're bringing to you. You'll be able to work with a individual mentor that will be there to support you. That's been great as far as recruitment, because students really light up and they know, okay, this is a space that I really can be comfortable in and really can have the freedom to be able to build without fear, really, in this space. So I've also been able to, speak to students directly. I've gone to a lot of classes and sat in virtually, and it's been so exciting to hear what the students are working on and to really connect with them individually and be able to point out resources such as VentureWell that they should explore and really, can be able to use towards their growth as an entrepreneur. But I've also been able to talk to faculty and to be able to communicate with them. Career centers, it's been really exciting. There has been a challenge in a way because of all the things that happened this summer, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement. There's so many groups and so many resources that have been able to appear from it. And so a lot of schools have been asking, is this program sustainable? Is this just a one-time thing? And so to be able to say, this is year one, but we have a lot of longevity ahead has been really exciting. So sometimes it has been a challenge as far as getting my foot in the door with the schools. And then, to bring back up, all HBCUs do not have entrepreneurship centers, programs, and classes. But by really being able to connect with faculty champions on their campuses that have students in their classes that really would benefit from this program and programs like this, that's really been where I've been able to connect and recruit by making those individual connections. And 300 students later and over 50 HBCUs later, it's really a great group that we've been able to work with so far.
And then in terms of alumni, what organizations or how are you connecting with that group?
Yeah, so a lot of major cities actually have HBCU alumni alliances, and so it's been great to work with them. And then a lot of the HBCUs also have alumni affairs, and so being able to work with them, for example, Oakwood University, it's been such a great honor to be able to work with their team because there's faculty members, professors, entrepreneurship professors, as well as alumni affairs all coming together and really being able to send the information out to students. So just being able to, work with small teams that are comprised of different departments and faculty members, that has been a great way to get information out.
Great, thank you. So now we'd like to open up for questions from the attendees. So please send those through the chat or through the Q&A, excuse me. If not, I will ask some more questions. Let's see. Okay, I have a question. Okay, so Jade, can you talk about strategies that you use to build confidence in innovators from underrepresented groups that may be different? Like, do you see a difference between working potentially with a PWI versus a minority serving institution or historically Black college and university? So do you see there being differences? I guess they're questions for both you and Jimmy.
Yeah, so I don't have much experience working with predominantly white institutions so far, but I will say that I think one of the major differences that I've seen, and we do have actually a few students in the group that are actually from predominantly white institutions, and they came to our program because they didn't necessarily feel supported in their programs at their schools as Black students. So they wanted to come to a space where they could see students and founders that looked like them. And so I think that's something that's important for PWIs to make sure to implement. It's really important that diverse founders are brought in to speak with the students. It's really important that if there is a mentorship program built in, that you make sure that there are minorities in there. Like, it shouldn't be an afterthought. It needs to be really the beginning. And even if there are not minority students within your group, you still need to make sure that there are minority faces that are talking to the students and that perspective is really, really important. The journey that Black founders face as far as raising funding is so much different than the
Mhm.
journey that white founders face when getting funding. Like, we can count the amount of Black founders that have raised over $1 million. And
Right.
for many founders that are white, that's just not the case. That's not a challenge that they face. A lot of them are able to get over $1 million in the friends and family round, right? So it's just a very different journey. And so it's important that that diversity and those diverse perspectives are brought to every single program, so that diverse students can, relate to someone, but also white students can learn more and really be able to know about the different journeys that everyone faces on this entrepreneurial path. So I think that's something that definitely more schools need to implement, and that would really benefit students as well. And then I will revisit, it has been a different challenge, I think, just because a lot of HBCUs unfortunately don't have the resources and funding to be able to have these entrepreneurship programs on campuses. And so as a result, I think a lot of the students are really used to having to navigate things on their own. And they have a comfort level, right? So terms like an MVP, capital, venture capital are terms that they may not have been familiar with because they've had to bootstrap. They've had to be able to navigate things on their own. They didn't have a choice. And so introducing these terms to them and making sure that it's in a way that they feel comfortable, and continuing to use them so that they get used to it. So when they hear it next time, they know what that means. That's something else that we've made sure to implement, so that, again, everybody feels comfortable. Everyone has the confidence to go out and build amazing things. And hearing and seeing what the students are building, it's so amazing, right? To know that these students have big, great, amazing, life-changing ideas. There's unicorns in the group.
Mhm.
So it's really exciting to be able to work with them, provide these resources, and give them the support that they otherwise may not have been able to have.
Thank you.
If I could speak to one thing, Jade, that you said. So I think the idea that even at predominantly white institutions, you absolutely can be inclusive and should be inclusive. And could be as simple as making sure the case studies that you're using, right? The examples that you're pointing to when you're celebrating external market successes and you're celebrating the idea of entrepreneurship, right? That you're not being siloed in your view of it, and that you're not defaulting to the Silicon Valley, right? Predominantly white male-led technologist idea. So yes, I think in terms of building confidence, are there different approaches and strategies if you're working within an HBCU or a large minority serving institution or a PWI? I think it's less about the individual and more about the ecosystem, the overall environment and the context in which they're operating, including, as you said, how do we not have that when you do have faculty and you do bring in speakers, and that you are still being inclusive with it overall, and that it's not being like a one and done tokenized, like, oh yeah, we had one Black founder once, right? Or we had one African-American woman once present to our class. I think that idea of one and done is that's not the way it works. There needs to be continual iteration, affirmation, contextual affirmation. And so as one example, working with even external organizations and community-based entrepreneur support organizations, and with your small business administration and the SBDC that might be in your city or neighborhoods, and working again with even like other not-for-profit organizations, I think that's super helpful, because the reality is that as a university, I'm not going to be able to provide necessarily all end-to-end services. As an example, the seed funding that I could provide is what we'd call the friends and family round, right? It's like the first $250 to the maybe $10,000 or $20,000. If we do our jobs well and we can connect our students then to the greater ecosystem, and then they're super competitive in whether it's the Arizona Innovation Challenge or they're competitive in the Greater Phoenix Tech Challenge, so that we're working with this idea of a continuous ecosystem. That's also how we build participation. That's how we broaden participation. That's how we build confidence, because we're queuing up the founder, no matter their background, their discipline, to be able to be successful, not just because we said at the university, like, oh, you're successful, but because they're also able to be very competitive externally. So I think there's a real complexity here and systems level way of thinking that we need to be able to approach broadening participation overall.
Great, thank you. So we've got a couple of questions that have come in. So, and you talked a little bit about this before, Jimmy, but the question that came through is, how do you do an audit of your school spaces, both physically and emotional, to determine where you should act to make it better for underrepresented students?
Yeah, so I think it's putting yourself, and it's the idea of from the perspective, right? If I'm a student in a wheelchair, or I'm a student that depends on, walking support, or I'm a student that depends on physically a certain type of things, then how do you, from my perspective, right? No big deal. I run up and down, I go to the stairs. Everybody likes these big, broad stairs. Everybody likes the idea of these kind of sweeping esplanades. And then you're saying, well, how do I navigate that space if I have a physical disability, as an example? So I think it's really putting the heart of design thinking, right, is putting the user at the center, putting the person who's supposed to be the beneficiary, the prime user, at the center of it, and trying, not only from your perspective, which may be limited, right? You may or may not have a limited perspective of your lived experience and your own professional experience and personal experience, which is why engaging participatory design is super important. And that means having multiplicity of voices from various perspectives, various viewpoints, be able to say what are the barriers and what are the attractors, because they're both, right? There are two things. One, things that keep people out, and the other is things that draw people in. And so whether it's emotional, whether it's mental, whether it's physical, I think it's having that diverse perspective of voices be able to weigh in on. And, and frankly, at a point being able to say, okay, so by what do my choices then signal? What, take it to the next step. And somebody says like, oh, I just really like, kind of white, shiny furniture. Okay, what does that signal to somebody else? And what does that signal to the next person? How might somebody else interpret that? And it's really from that perspective of thinking of it from the user's perspective, not just the decision maker's perspective, right? And so that participatory design, that participatory feedback loop, that continuous willingness to be open and iterate, I think is a key to building these inclusive spaces overall.
And
Right.
I'll also add as well, I think it's important to ask the students, right? Especially if we're talking about underrepresented students, ask them. We always talk about, customer discovery when you're building a business, but it's something that we need to do when we're building programs as well. And it doesn't have to be formal. Like you can just approach a student and ask them, hey, I just wanted to check in. How's your business going? And do you feel supported by the program? Is there anything that you need? And that's a really great way to really evaluate, how the program is doing and really, what needs are not being met or what you're doing really well and what students want to see more of. And I would also challenge you too to also talk to other underrepresented founders and ask them, what was your collegiate experience like? Similarly to how I was asked on this panel, and what are resources that really helped you and what were resources that you really needed? I think that can make sure that, your biases are off and that you're really able to lean in and be open to answers that you may not have even thought of, and the areas that may not have been something that you may have thought of as something you were doing really great or support that's needed.
Great, thank you. So another question from the audience. So, and Jimmy, again, you touched on this, but if we can have a little bit of expand on this. So question is, can you speak on creating not only physical, but emotional spaces and language which are conducive to including people with disabilities?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the idea that just being really mindful and intentional about your choices of words. I had this discussion with somebody the other day where they said, it's a very fast, rapid fire, just sort of like 20 questions thing. And somebody said, are you a pirate or ninja? And I said, I know that we use the word ninja a lot in entrepreneurship. And I said, but I've got to tell you, as an Asian person, I find that word offensive, right? Because the root of the word ninja was like secret assassin. And the idea that somehow you've got to be this stealthy Asian. And we all know that those stereotypes can kind of go too far. And so the idea of whether it's about using tropes, whether it's about using language that you think, might just be, for you, you're like, oh, it's colloquial. It's no big deal to say, hey, listen, you've got blind spots all the time about these following things. Like, well, what that mean then if you're a blind person? And you always hear that as a deficiency, right? Or the idea that, oh, you're in a dark place. What does that mean to a person of color when you're always hearing the idea of being in a dark place means that it's in a bad place, a negative place, right? So I think really putting yourself, to Jade's point, in the user, the end user, the receiver's position and saying, what is being communicated to me, either overtly or inadvertently? And overtly, nobody ever, I shouldn't say nobody, very few people ever say like, we're designing to keep you in particular out, right? It's never that overt. It's the subtle, it's the continued, it's the everyday use of language, it's the normalized exclusionary language that can be the most problematic. So I think having the wherewithal to be able to ask yourself hard questions. Am I either overtly or inadvertently creating barriers and exclusion with the language that I use, the images that I choose, the people that I hire, the people that I celebrate, the people that I criticize publicly? So all across the board, I think holistically. And then frankly, get some help. Nobody expects anybody to be 100% versed in every single aspect, from physical design to emotional well-being. So I'll give you one example. We partner with our student services team at the university all the time, right? We have student development professionals. Their entire job is to be thinking about student development pathways, student development right markers, being able to create those environments that allow mostly young adults to flourish and to be aware of things that are potentially triggering or harmful or cause harm. So yes, we have a student development professional on our team, but she has at her disposal an entire student development, student services, professional suite of colleagues who are more than happy to partner with her. Same thing with our residential life team, same thing with our faculty that work in a number of spaces, same thing with faculty that work specifically in the realm of social identity, whether it's gender, ethnicity, race. And so reach out to people, but this comes back to this idea of conducting authentic research, right? What I don't want is I don't want somebody to reach out to me and say, hey, you're an Asian American woman of color. We're central casting right now. We just want to look like we're inclusive. So can you come and spend some time with us? Of course, nobody ever says it that on the nose, but once in a while, you're only 1 degree away from that, right? We've all experienced this where you're like, are you asking me because I'm a woman and I'm a woman of color? Or are you asking me because you actually think I have some expertise here, right? We've all been in that position. So what we need accountability partners, we need collaborators, we need contributors, and we can learn from an entire ecosystem, but it has to be authentic. You have to be looking to them for their expertise. And again, it's not one and done. It's not like, oh, can you come once and do an audit, check, 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 these things look good. Lots of diversity. Oh, look at that, lots of happy faces of lots of a variety of people, all right? And then go away 3 years later, everything kind of slowly reverts back to the status quo and to the norm. So if that's one of the things I would say is reach out to a multiplicity of resources that are available to you and do it in a way that's clear that you're looking to learn, you're looking to create sustainable change, and you're looking to create lasting impact.
Great, thank you. So one last question, and this is for you, Jade. So I'm curious as to why NextCubed chose to support students in the area of FinTech, EdTech, prop tech, and also for folks to hear about this concept of centers of excellence that you've created.
Sure, absolutely. So NextCubed as a company before the HBCU Founders Program has really had really great successful accelerators working with early stage founders. And so historically, those programs have been in financial technology and digital health and wellness. And I'm very proud to say that a few weeks ago, our digital health and wellness cohort graduated from the accelerator, and the entire cohort was minorities and as well as immigrants and women. And so that was really exciting to see. It wasn't intentional, but the fact that we were able to support those founders and really work with them. NextCubed just really values diversity. Out of our portfolio of 75 companies, over half are women and minority. So it's just something that's really important to us. And it's something that we really value as well as diversity. And so when we looked at the program and we were looking at which areas and industries we really wanted to support students in, we looked at the disparities within the Black community, right? The housing disparities, education disparities, financial education disparities, and health. And so we knew that those were the 4 sectors that we really wanted to make sure that students were able to learn about, as well as be encouraged and inspired to be able to develop their own innovations and solutions that would directly impact their own communities. And so through working with those 4 industries, we were able to have 4 incredible webinars that are now on YouTube as well. So you guys are welcome to watch them. And we had conversations. We had conversations with corporate executives that were in these 4 industries. We did a webinar per industry. And we also had conversations with underrepresented founders that have really been able to create and develop solutions, innovations, and startups within those industries. And so that conversation that involved corporate executives as well as founders and investors was really, really amazing, but also inspiring for the students to be able to see themselves and see what is possible for them and what they can do to impact their own communities.
Great, thank you. So I think we are at the end of our Q&A session. Thank you again so much for being part of this conversation. And I would like to hand it over to Shaheen. But again, thanks to everyone who's been on the call that's contributed to this conversation, or VentureWell's continuing conversation about advancing equity through creating inclusive spaces, building confidence. And Shaheen, I'm turning it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Monica. And thanks as well to Jimmy and Jade for your remarks. I think, as always, it's amazing when we have these conversations, just how quickly 45 or 50 minutes can pass. And so I really appreciate your insights, and as well as the interactivity from the audience. It was really exciting to hear from you all. So I did want to say that you'll be receiving an email after this within the next couple of days that includes the recording for this. We'll also be posting it to VentureWell's YouTube channel as well as on our website. And so if there are other people in your network that you want to pass this along to, definitely encourage sharing. We will also be having the third in our community conversation series in February, date TBD, likely early in the month. And that will focus on the action areas of validating multiple pathways to success and developing a holistic organizational approach. And I think certainly many of the remarks today started to tease at some of those themes, but we'll go a lot deeper. And we'll definitely let you know when that's available to sign up. I also wanted to say, for those of you that may have attended in the past or are interested, VentureWell's annual conference, which this year will be virtual, will be happening March 17th through 19th, 2021. It is currently, our registration is live, and I'm going to actually chat a link. An early registration, which is a conference pass for $50, is available through February 1st. One of the 5 tracks that we'll have at the conference is focusing specifically around advancing equity. And so there'll be a lot of additional experts from across our network who will be presenting sessions. And the more full session slate will be available early in the new year. So finally, just wanted to say that, again, appreciate you all coming. As the webinar closes, you'll get a quick 4-question survey. Really appreciate any feedback you have for us and encourage you to share that. And again, thank you so much for coming. Thank you to our panelists and moderators for your words of wisdom and for sharing. And look forward to hopefully everyone has happy holidays, a great start to 2021, and look forward to seeing you in February.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks, Monica.
Thank
Nice
you.
to spend time
Thank
with
you, Jay. Thank you, Jimmy.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.